The forgotten German jet that could have ended the war. The last dawn over Berlin. The air raid siren was no longer a warning, it was the soundtrack to the Reich's collapse. It wailed, a long, mournful, hopeless sound, not against the first wave, but against the endless, shattering climax of the third. Dr. Elias Richter did not run for the bunker. He stood beneath the shattered glass dome of the Reich Aviation Ministry's main research laboratory, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his once immaculate uniform. The dust of pulverized concrete, the gray snow of defeat, drifted around him. The sky above Berlin was no longer blue, it was a boiling, choked canvas of black and silver. The silver belonged to the B-17 flying fortresses, a silent, contemptuous armada that streamed past at high altitude. They came in such numbers that they seemed to blot out the sun, flying so high their passage was less heard and more felt, a deep, chest-rattling vibration that was the physical manifestation of overwhelming force. Richter, once the pride of German aerospace, designer of sleek interceptors that had ruled the early war skies, now watched the spectacle with a terrifying emptiness. His gaze was fixed not on the bombers, but on the desperate, futile dance below them. A flight of 5 Messerschmitt Me-262 jets, the fastest things in the sky, were making a high-speed pass. They were fleeting streaks of defiance against the tide. He counted them, 5. Moments later, only 3 survived the concentrated barrage of tailgun fire. They had the speed, but the Allies had the numbers, the altitude, and the fuel. Richter knew the truth. For every ton of high-octane gasoline the Reich managed to scrape together for a handful of jets, the Allies poured hundreds into the sky. The very air over Europe had ceased to be a domain to be contested, it was a conveyor belt of destruction, owned outright by the enemy. 10 to 1, he thought, the number cold and heavy in his mind. Perhaps 15 to 1 now. Richter felt a hand clamp down hard on his shoulder. Get down, Richter. Are you mad? It was Hauptmann Falk, the young officer assigned to the laboratory, his face smudged with soot and fear. Falk was scrambling towards the basement entrance, dragging his heavy leather map case. Richter merely shook off the grip. It doesn't matter, Falk. If they want this building, they'll have it. The only thing they haven't bombed is the ground we stand on, and they'll get to that eventually. A roar louder than the combined bombers erupted, not overhead, but nearby. A direct hit on the adjacent railway yard. The force slammed Richter against a ruined column, momentarily stealing his breath. When he recovered, the smell of burning oil and coal was overpowering. That, he gasped, pointing to the smoke plume that defined the latest inferno, was likely the fuel for Jagdgeschwader 7. They are bombing our supplies before the convoys even reach the airfields. The throat of the Luftwaffe is severed. He dusted off his uniform with a slow, deliberate movement, ignoring the trembling of his own hands. The collapse wasn't sudden, it was total, granular, and systemic. The summons. Richter had just made his way to his office, a space now featuring more plywood and canvas than window glass, when the red telephone on his desk gave a sharp, imperious ring. This was the line that bypassed all local commands, connecting him directly to the chancellery. He picked it up, expecting a query about his latest, and already obsolete, jet propulsion schematic. The voice on the other end was tinny, yet charged with the absolute, neurotic energy of total power. It was SS Obergruppenführer Kammler, the man now responsible for V-weapons production and the final, frantic organization of the Reich's shrinking resources. Dr. Richter. Report to the Führerbunker immediately. Do not pause for any reason. Your assignment is now divorced from the RLM. You are to report to Sonderkommission D. This is the only way now. Sir, with respect, the rail lines are. Then you will walk, Doctor. You will run. You will crawl. Do you understand? The destiny of the Reich depends on your presence within the hour. The line went dead, leaving a thin, persistent hum that sounded exactly like the fear settling in Richter's stomach. He didn't need to ask what Sonderkommission D was. D stood for Dämmerung, twilight. The final order. The last chance. The desperate attempt to conjure a miracle weapon. He left his blueprints on the desk, symbols of yesterday's hubris, and walked out into the wreckage of Berlin. The Allies had their thousands of aircraft. Hitler had his despair, and now, he had Richter. The task was not to design an aircraft, it was to design an impossibility. The airless room. The Führerbunker was a place of feverish, recycled air and damp concrete. Down here, the war outside was reduced to a dull, distant thudding, the sound of history turning against them. Richter was led not to the main conference hall, but to a small, isolated room where 3 men waited, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a single hanging lamp. One was Kammler, tight-lipped and pacing. Another was an aging, gaunt Generalfeldmarschall whose name Richter couldn't recall, his eyes dark with defeat. The third was a man whose presence immediately chilled the room, Obersturmführer Klaus Voss. Voss was impeccably dressed, his black SS uniform spotless, contrasting sharply with the dust and fatigue of the others. His face was a mask of cold, surgical indifference, his hands resting on the gold handle of a dress dagger. He was the embodiment of the regime's cold certainty, immune to the chaos above. Kammler did not waste time with pleasantries. The situation is irreversible, Doctor. The Wehrmacht is retreating. The Luftwaffe is destroyed. Our industry is rubble. There is only one path remaining, the path of revolutionary science. Kammler gestured to Voss. Obersturmführer Voss will be your security chief. He has total authority over the project. All delays, failures, or suspected breaches of secrecy will be dealt with swiftly and decisively. Voss did not look at Richter. He looked past him, as if appraising the wall. Discipline will be absolute, Doctor. Your engineers will answer only to you. But you, Herr Doktor, will answer only to the success of the mission. There is no alternative. The Generalfeldmarschall finally spoke, his voice dry and hollow. The Allies are preparing a final, massive assault on the Reich's industrial core. We estimate 2 months. You have 90 days, Richter. Design an interceptor that can be built in deep, protected tunnels. It must be a weapon of attrition. It must require minimal fuel and minimal runway. It must, Doctor, be the miracle that saves us from the abyss. Richter finally spoke, his voice low and steady despite the tremor in his throat. A miracle, gentlemen, requires materials. It requires time. It requires a stable design environment. Voss stepped forward, closing the distance. His eyes were the coldest blue Richter had ever seen. You are not being asked for your objections, Doctor. You are being given one final order from the Führer. Your facility is waiting in the Harz Mountains, a complex we call Tiefenwerk. It has resources you cannot imagine. But let us be clear on one point. Voss leaned in until Richter could smell the scent of stale tobacco and gun oil. Failure is not an option. Failure is treason. And the executioner does not wait for a second chance. Richter understood. His mission was no longer about engineering, it was about survival, both his own and that of his country, even if the country itself was a dying malignancy. He had been given the ultimate task, to hold back the tide with nothing but a sketchpad and the threat of a bullet. I understand, Richter said, his shoulders squaring. I will begin immediately. I absolutely understand that you want a long, continuous narrative for this project. To be clear once more, I cannot generate the full 15,000 plus words in a single go due to technical limitations on response length. However, I will continue writing the scenario, Operation Götterdämmerung, following the detailed outline we established. I will generate the next significant portion of the story, focusing on the team's arrival and the initial engineering challenges. The Technical Zentrum. Richter stepped through the steel doors into the Technisches Zentrum. The air here was cleaner, pressurized, and dominated by the smell of ammonia, drafting ink, and hot metal. It was a starkly contrasting world to the cavern outside, a sterile bubble of intellectual intensity amidst the grime and desperation. The room was a maze of drafting tables, heavy mechanical schematics, and two-dimensional aerodynamic testing setups. His core team, about 20 engineers, draftsmen, and technicians, all pulled from various failing projects across the Reich, looked up with varying degrees of exhaustion and hope. Leading the technical staff was Dr. Anna Brandt. A materials scientist, Anna was one of the few women in a high-ranking position within the Reich's research hierarchy, a testament to her undeniable brilliance. Her face was smudged, her hair tied back severely, and her eyes held a spark of defiant intellect that immediately drew Richter's attention. Dr. Brandt, Richter greeted, moving towards her. I see you've already established a command center. Anna nodded, folding her arms. I volunteered, Doctor. I saw the orders come through. If the task is to save German aviation, better that we control the pencil than let a committee of generals ruin another promising design. Her directness was a cold splash of reality. She didn't speak of saving the Reich, she spoke of saving the engineering principle. Our initial task is not an aircraft, Richter said, laying the Horten 8 folder on the table. It is an equation. An equation to fit this radical airframe with the only available engine. He unrolled a massive blueprint of the Ho 229, its sleek, flying wing shape drawing murmurs of admiration. Gentlemen, the Horton brothers gifted us with maximum efficiency. But we have to power it with the Jumo 004B. A collective groan rippled through the room. The Jumo 004B was a marvel, but temperamental and built with low-quality, compromised materials. Its lifespan was measured in dozens of flying hours, not hundreds. Dr. Georg Steiner, the propulsion specialist, immediately stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Herr Doktor, the Jumo 004B runs hot enough as it is. We barely keep the Me-262's engine turbines from warping. Fitting 2 of them deep into the Ho 229's wing roots, with the engine housing built from plywood and Volkswerk alloys. The heat shielding required will make the aircraft too heavy. This was the first hurdle, and it was a mountain. The sleek, wooden composite flying wing was designed to be lightweight. The heavy shielding needed to protect the wooden structure from the Jumo's blast furnace heat would negate the weight savings, making the plane too slow and rendering the VTOL vertical takeoff and landing capability, a rumored secondary goal of the original Ho 8, impossible. The problem of the wing root. Richter tapped the blueprint where the engine intake met the wing's leading edge. We cannot use steel or standard aluminum shielding. We must find an alternative. Something light, something that can be produced here, using the materials we have. Anna Brandt stepped up, pointing to a notation on the materials list: Tego film, a phenolic resin glue used to bond the plywood sheets. The wing itself is our best insulator, Doktor. Plywood and carbon black infused resins offer better thermal protection than conventional materials. The problem isn't the outer skin, it's the inner structure near the combustion chamber. We need a ceramic-based composite, or perhaps a refractory metal that can be cold-formed, not cast. Steiner scoffed. Refractory metals are a fantasy, Anna. The Allies bombed the last shipment of molybdenum and nickel 3 months ago. You know that. Then we rethink the airflow, Anna shot back, not backing down. We design a triple-skin engine cowling and use the intake air not just for combustion, but to create a cool air blanket around the jet housing before it reaches the wood. We sacrifice a percentage of thrust for thermal safety. The room erupted in debate, a familiar, passionate chaos that contrasted sharply with the deadly silence of the guard outside. For a moment, Richter was home. He was in his element, guiding the energy of brilliant minds toward an impossible solution. He raised his hand. Anna is correct. The structure must cool the engine, not the other way around. Georg, draft schematics for a triple-skin cowling with forced cool air induction. Calculate the maximum thrust reduction we can tolerate and still achieve Mach 0.9. That is our tolerance. The weight of the project was already settling on them. Every compromise was a threat to the design, every failure was a threat to their lives. The shadow of Voss. The intellectual effort lasted 6 days without a break. Sleep was caught on folding cots, food was meager, high-starch rations. Richter lived on weak coffee and adrenaline, guiding the refinement of the Horton plan. On the 7th day, the steel doors of the Technisches Zentrum hissed open, and Obersturmführer Voss walked in, accompanied by 2 armed guards. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted. Voss surveyed the room with thinly veiled contempt, his eyes flicking over the chalk-dusted hands and the exhausted faces. Dr. Richter, Voss began, his voice dangerously soft. The Schedule 1 provided allocated 5 days for initial conception. We are 2 days past that. Yet, I see nothing ready for tooling. I see only dust and paper. Richter stepped between Voss and the drafting table, shielding the sensitive blueprints. Obersturmführer, we are adapting a radical wooden airframe for 2 high-powered jet engines built with substandard alloys. The thermal dynamics alone require critical calculation. We cannot risk the first prototype burning up on its first test. That would be a far greater waste of time and resources. Voss walked past Richter, stopping at Steiner's table, where the triple-skin cowling schematics were laid out. He picked up a slide rule, tapping it lightly against the paper. Waste. The only waste I recognize, Doctor, is the labor hour. The timetable is not a suggestion from the Führer. It is an absolute command. He turned his attention to Anna Brandt, who met his stare with unflinching defiance. The structural solution, Fräulein Doktor. Are we on schedule? We have a solution for the engine heat, Anna stated calmly. It involves a redesigned cowling and the use of the wood composite as the primary heat sink. We will achieve the thrust goals. And the VTOL capability. The initial order stated minimal runway usage. The Führer wants to launch these from forests and fields, not airbases. Richter quickly cut in. The VTOL goal requires a separate rocket booster, the Walter cycle unit. Integrating that unit with the main jet engines on this airframe requires substantial redesign and testing that will extend the timeline beyond 90 days. We focused on the primary goal, a high-speed, stealthy interceptor to break the bomber streams. Voss smiled, a cold, humorless movement of the mouth. A failure of nerve, doctor. Or a failure of imagination. He dropped the slide rule onto the table, the metallic clatter echoing in the sudden silence. I will give you 3 more days to finalize the core schematics and begin component manufacturing. At that point, the schedule is accelerated by 2 weeks. You will make up the time. Do you understand, Dr. Richter? The hours you waste here are measured in Allied bombs falling on German cities. I will not tolerate this. I suggest you remember that I control the gate, and I control the execution detail. With a final, contemptuous look at the sweat-stained scientists, Voss spun on his heel and left, the hiss of the hydraulic door sounding like a sigh of relief from the entire room. Richter looked at his team. Their faces were pale, their energy depleted. He knew Voss's threat was real and absolute. Gentlemen, Dr. Brandt, Richter said, picking up the slide rule. We just lost 2 weeks. The triple skin design must be finalized by midnight. Georg, focus on the structural mounts. Anna, begin coordinating with the material stores. We will not fail because of a lack of effort. We will succeed, and we will finish this. The fear was real, but it was now laced with a steely determination. The project was no longer about national pride, it was a desperate race for survival against the fanatical SS officer who controlled their fate. I absolutely appreciate your dedication to developing this epic-length narrative based on the incredible story of the Horten Ho 229 Flying Wing. However, I will continue to write the scenario, Operation Götterdämmerung, following the detailed outline. The story will now fully transition into Act 2, The Race Against Time, where we see Dr. Anna Brandt's breakthrough and the extreme difficulty of translating the radical, almost artistic design of the Horten brothers into a mass-produced weapon. The 3 days Voss had granted turned into a crucible of intellectual agony. Every engineer in the Technisches Zentrum was driven to the brink, haunted by the specter of Voss and the rhythmic, distant pounding of the drills in the labor cavern. The issue remained the same, heat versus wood. The Jumo 004B jet engines, built with recycled, lower-grade steel, ran hotter and less reliably than their original specifications. The wooden wing of the Ho 229, despite its composite construction, could not withstand the sustained exhaust heat without charring, leading to catastrophic structural failure at high speeds. Dr. Anna Brandt spent her hours submerged in the archive's materials database, hunting for forgotten Reich patents. Most engineers were focused on metals, Anna was focused on carbon. We are trying to build a firebreak with water, she muttered to Richter late one night, her face pale under the harsh arc lamps. We need her to fight fire. Richter watched her work. She wasn't merely calculating, she was intuitively connecting disparate scientific threads. Her specialty was composites and adhesives, the unglamorous underbelly of aviation science. On the 3rd day, just hours before Voss's deadline, she let out a sharp cry of triumph. Phenolic foam, Doktor. Not just the Tego film adhesive, but the core structural foam. The brothers used it for lightness, but they didn't realize its full potential. She slammed a dusty, brittle technical report onto Richter's desk. It detailed early experiments with carbon black-infused phenolic foam, a rigid, lightweight, closed-cell foam used for insulation in refrigeration units. The carbon black is the key, she explained, tracing the diagram with a trembling finger. It's a pre-oxidation layer. If we inject and cure the foam with a higher concentration of carbon black, it creates a surface that, when exposed to extreme heat, the engine's initial blast, will char instantly and form a ceramic-like crust. Richter grabbed the report, his heart hammering. Ablative shielding. Precisely. It's self-consuming, yes, but only the outer micron-thin layer. The char layer provides thermal shock resistance and dramatically slows heat transfer to the structural plywood beneath. We can use a thinner air cooling jacket, which saves weight, and still protect the wing root. It was a brilliant, elegant solution. It meant they didn't need scarce refractory metals, they needed glue, wood, and a chemical process they could manage underground. It transformed the plane's vulnerability into a source of its durability. Richter leaned over the table, fatigue forgotten. Anna, contact materials store section C. Divert all phenolic resin shipments to the mixing vats. We start building the M003 test section now. If Voss walks in here, he sees production, not paper. The unseen eye. As Richter and his team plunged into the chaotic, yet focused, activity of prototype construction, a different kind of calculation was being made several kilometers away, high up on the granite ridge overlooking the Harz forests. Major Vivian, Viv, Carter, OSS operative, former linguist, and now a clandestine warrior, lay prone in a makeshift hide, the freezing ground pressing into her chest. Next to her was her radio operator, a stoic British sergeant named Finney. Viv adjusted the long lens of her observation telescope, its sight focused directly on the camouflaged entrance to Tiefenwerk. That's the third time the rail spur has opened this hour, Finney. Not coal, not supplies. Lumber. High-grade plywood and specialized resin drums. Finney tapped out a message on the tiny, silent radio key. The local resistance said the activity began 3 weeks ago, Major. They call it the Shadow Project. The rumor is a wonder weapon, made of wood, to cheat the material shortage. Viv lowered the lens, her breath fogging the glass. She knew the reputation of the Horton brothers. She also knew Dr. Elias Richter. They had briefly crossed paths at a pre-war aeronautical conference in Paris. She remembered a man obsessed with speed and purity of design. A wooden jet. The concept was terrifying in its genius. If the Germans could mass-produce a jet that was faster than the best Allied fighter, P-51 Mustang could hit 700+ km/h, and virtually invisible to radar, the massive B-17 bomber fleets, which relied on escort fighters for protection, would be defenseless. The aerial advantage, purchased with the blood of thousands of Allied airmen, could be wiped out overnight. The intelligence is confirmed, Viv said, her voice sharp with urgency. They are building the flying wing. Finney, send the priority signal. Operation NIGHTGHOST confirmed at Harz location. Requires immediate neutralization. Target. Manufacturing caverns. Their mission had shifted from gathering intelligence to lethal intervention. The key was finding a way inside an impregnable underground fortress run by the most fanatical elements of the SS. The tunnel people. Back inside the Tiefenwerk, Richter was becoming intimately familiar with the structure of despair. The sheer size of the facility meant constant interaction with the labor force. The construction of the massive jigs necessary to assemble the Ho-229's seamless wing, a task demanding absolute precision, could not be done by the exhausted, starved workers. Richter fought Voss and won a small, painful victory. He was allowed to select 20 skilled former technicians from the prisoner population to work directly on the assembly jigs, provided they were guarded by Voss's SS detail at all times. One of them was a gaunt, middle-aged man named Jan, a Polish aircraft mechanic imprisoned for petty sabotage. Jan's hands, though skeletal, still retained the muscle memory and finesse of a master craftsman. This is not a fuselage, Jan, Richter explained, pointing to the delicate internal structure of the wing root. It is a single stressed surface. Any defect here, we all burn when the engine's light. Jan simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the work. He spoke little, but his meticulous attention to the glue joints and the placement of the internal ribs was flawless. One evening, while Richter was supervising the fitting of the ablative foam near the new cowling, Jan spoke softly, without looking up. The Me-262. A fine machine, Herr Doktor. Too late, though. You will build this one faster, yes. Richter swallowed, tasting the bitter irony. We will build it faster, Jan. But for whom? And for what purpose? Jan looked up then, his eyes dark and empty. The purpose is to survive the shift, Herr Doktor. For us. For you, perhaps, it is to avoid the guard's bullet. The miracle weapon is only a distraction from the end. The conversation, brief and devastating, confirmed Richter's darkest thoughts. The plane was not a savior, it was a desperate death rattle, consuming the lives of those who built it. His engineering pride was now utterly submerged in a moral obligation to protect Jan and his small, valuable crew, a protection that could only be ensured by the project's success. The first test section, the M003. The production of the first test component, the M003 wing root, was rushed and terrifying. Using Anna's new foam and the triple skin air jacket design, the team mounted a spare Jumo 004B engine from a crashed Me-262. The test was conducted in a specially dug side cavern, the noise muffled by heavy blast doors. Voss stood behind Richter, his presence a pressure, his breathing the only sound besides the metallic whine of the engine starter. The turbine spun up, igniting with a deafening whoomph. Flames shot out the rear, turning the enclosed space into a roaring inferno. The heat was immense, even through the observation window. The engine ran at 100% military power for 5 minutes, the target duration for an intercept climb. Every second was an eternity. When the engine was finally cut and the cooling fans rushed in, Richter and Anna sprinted to the section. They examined the wooden wing structure with flashlights. The outer layer of the ablative foam was charred black, exactly as predicted. It was rock hard, almost ceramic. But beneath the char, the primary plywood structure was merely warm to the touch. It held. A collective, silent exhale filled the chamber. Richter turned to Anna, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his fatigue. "It's brilliant, Anna. You've given us the chance." Voss stepped up, his expression unreadable. He did not praise, he merely processed the data. "Satisfactory," he pronounced. "Dr. Brandt, you have solved the heat problem. You have cost me 7 days on the clock. You will not do it again." Production of the first full prototype, the WarThe Go 229 V3, begins tomorrow. And I want the VTOL rocket component integrated. Richter stared at Voss. "Obersturmführer, we agreed the VTOL was a secondary, unachievable goal. The Führer has insisted," Voss cut in sharply. "He wants to launch these from any hidden forest clearing. He has allocated 5 Walter cycle rocket boosters from the V2 program. You will find a way to integrate them into the wing structure, beneath the main jets. The time you saved with the foam, you will now spend on the rocket. The schedule is non-negotiable." The victory of the heat shield was instantly negated by the insane demand for a dual-engine system, jet and rocket, on a single, delicate airframe. The Ho 229 was about to become less a sleek glider and more a volatile, high-speed bomb waiting to happen. The order to integrate the Walter cycle rocket boosters was a catastrophe for Richter. The Horten Ho 229 was a thing of minimalist beauty, designed for speed and lightness. The rocket engines, used for the V2 program, were heavy, volatile, and required enormous tankage for their highly corrosive propellant, T-Stoff high-concentration hydrogen peroxide, and C-Stoff hydrazine methanol. Richter stood before his design table, staring at the empty space beneath the wing roots. Integrating the Jumo jet engines was hard enough, fitting a second, volatile propulsion system without destroying the aerodynamic profile or exceeding the maximum structural weight was impossible. "The weight distribution will shift the center of gravity rearward," Dr. Georg Steiner protested, running calculations on his slide rule. "The stabilizers, or rather, the lack of them on a flying wing, will make it uncontrollable during the rocket burn. It will pitch up and tumble immediately." Anna Brandt traced the lines of the thin, wooden wing spar. "To house the fuel tanks for the T-Stoff in the wing section, we compromise the structural integrity. We would have to reinforce the spars with steel rods, which throws the stealth advantage out the window and adds tons of weight." Richter pressed his temples. The engineering integrity was being destroyed by bureaucratic demand. But then, the real political bomb dropped. A high-priority coded teletype arrived for Voss, who condescended to deliver the contents himself, reading the message with cold satisfaction. "An adjustment to the operational doctrine, Dr. Richter. The Führer finds your purely defensive role insufficient. The Go 229 V3 is now designated a Blitzbomber. It must carry a payload of 1,000 kilograms of ordnance, externally mounted, for use in the Vergeltungsschlag, the retaliation strike, against London and British ports." The blood drained from Richter's face. Steiner let out a soundless choke. Anna's jaw clenched so hard her teeth could be heard grinding. "Obersturmführer, that is madness." Richter's control finally snapped. "The Ho 229 is a sleek arrow. It's not a donkey. A 1,000 kilogram payload requires massive wing reinforcements and heavy landing gear. It will be too heavy to fly, rocket boosters are not. It won't reach 700 kilometers per hour, let alone outrun an Allied fighter." Voss's voice dropped to a quiet, lethal register. "Your job, Doctor, is to design the weapon the Führer demands. Not the weapon you think he needs. You will integrate the bombs and the rocket boosters. The aircraft must be able to climb vertically, drop its payload, and evade enemy airspace. The political arguments are over. The construction begins now. The engineers were defeated. They had solved the problem of fire and wood only to be undone by the catastrophic weight of politics and delusion. The Go-29 was no longer the elegant solution, it was a deformed, overburdened monstrosity before the first piece of ply was fully glued. The compromised blueprint. Richter had no choice. The new blueprint for the Go-229 V3 Blitzbomber was a patchwork of compromises. Reinforcements. Steel plates and heavy aluminum spars were inserted into the wings to handle the stress of external ordnance pylons, negating the stealth effect and adding dead weight. Propellant storage. The T-Stoff tanks for the rocket boosters were shrunken down to accommodate just 3 minutes of burn time, a terrifyingly short margin for vertical takeoff and high-speed climb. The payload. 2 external, crude bomb racks were designed to hang beneath the fuselage roots, creating immense drag. The new design was inherently unstable. It was slow, heavy, and a flying fire hazard due to the volatile rocket fuels. Richter knew that any flight of the V3 prototype would be a suicidal risk. He gathered his core team in the sealed-off materials lab. "Listen to me," he said, keeping his voice a low, urgent murmur. "We build the Blitzbomber as ordered. We use the slave labor for the fuselage and the bomber modifications, the parts that won't kill the pilot in midair." He pointed to a highly detailed schematic of the internal controls. "But on the flight control linkages and the rocket ignition system, the parts that affect stability and pilot survival, we use only the most skilled hands. And we do it our way. We build in safety defaults. We ensure the rocket can be jettisoned. We will keep this aircraft controllable, even if it means small acts of non-compliance with the heavy-handed plans." They were now walking a razor's edge, engineering sabotage in the name of technical safety. Anna and Steiner nodded, grimly accepting the moral ambiguity of their position. While the engineers fought the internal battle against bad design, the external threat closed in. Major Viv Carter and Sergeant Finney had spent 10 days in the freezing forests, meticulously mapping the Tiefenwerk's perimeter. They had discovered the facility had 3 main accesses, the main rail entrance too heavily guarded, a concealed service road mined and patrolled, and a high-altitude ventilation shaft set high on the ridge. The shaft was the only way in. It was a 200-meter drop and highly restricted, but it was unguarded save for the steel grate at the top. That night, under a starless, frigid sky, Viv and Finney approached the shaft. The wind howled, muffling the sounds of their movements. "Finney, you take point," Viv whispered, strapping a climbing harness around her. "You have the silent explosives for the grate. I'll follow with the signal disruptor. We get in, we place the charges on the main assembly jigs, and we get out. Do not engage the SS." Finney, a man of quiet competence, nodded and moved to the grate. The muffled PFFFT of the shaped charge detonation was almost swallowed by the wind. The grate warped, then fell with a distant, echoing clang down the shaft. Viv was the second one down. The air inside the shaft was warm and stale, thick with the smell of cement and hot metal. The only light came from their helmet lamps, illuminating the sheer, terrifying drop. They landed softly in a small maintenance tunnel, far above the main floor of the assembly cavern. "We're in," Viv breathed into her mic. "Now we find the V3 assembly. We have less than 90 minutes before the night shift changes." They navigated the auxiliary tunnels, relying on Finney's superb map-reading skills. They could hear the distant roar of ventilation fans and the occasional shout of a guard. Then, they heard the screams. Rounding a corner, they saw a sight that froze Viv's blood. A small group of concentration camp laborers, accused of stealing rations, were being herded into a side tunnel. Voss himself was overseeing the small, brutal operation. He was cold, meticulous, and completely unhurried. He was demonstrating, with chilling clarity, the expendability of human life that underpinned the entire project. Viv grabbed Finney's arm, pulling him back into the shadows just as Voss passed within meters of their hiding place. "He's the command officer," Viv whispered, her face pale. "We avoid him. The targets are the jigs." They continued, crawling through service ducts until they reached an observation point high above the main assembly cavern. Below them, illuminated by arc lamps, was the horrific sight, hundreds of starved prisoners working on the monstrous shape of the Go-229 V3. The plywood shell, now reinforced with ugly steel sections and featuring crude bomb pylons, sat on the huge assembly jig. It was clear proof, the project was real, and it was close to flight. Good God, Finney whispered, adjusting his demolition satchel. It's the size of a battleship. Place the charges, Finney. Low yield. Enough to shatter the jigs and warp the wing spars. We have to cripple the production line. Now. Just as Finney moved to descend a maintenance ladder, a high-pitched alarm began to shriek, echoing wildly through the cavern. Red alert. Intruder. Voss, down on the main floor, immediately spun toward the ceiling, his eyes scanning the shadowed upper levels. He had not seen them, but the SS had a sophisticated heat and motion detection system. Abort. Viv hissed into her mic. Finney, the diversion charges. Now. Finney scrambled, attaching a small, powerful charge to a water main 30 meters down the tunnel. The explosion was immediate, sharp, and localized. Water burst from the pipe, cascading down the tunnel. The diversion worked. Voss and his guards immediately charged toward the sound. Viv and Finney sprinted in the opposite direction, back toward the ventilation shaft. They reached the shaft door, expecting to climb. But two SS guards were already there, alerted by the system. A burst of automatic fire erupted. Finney shouted and collapsed, his leg taking a direct hit. Viv returned fire with her silenced Sten gun, dropping one guard. The second guard ducked behind a concrete pillar, returning heavy fire. Finney, can you climb? Viv yelled over the noise. No, Major. Go. The plans. Finney was clutching his leg, but his eyes were fixed on the demolition bag he still clutched. They cannot fly this thing. You must stop it. Voss's voice bellowed from the main cavern floor, seal the upper tunnels. Kill them. Viv saw the guards closing in. She had a terrible choice. Try to drag an injured man up 200 meters of rope, or use the last of the explosives. She grabbed the demolition bag from Finney's hand. I'll stop it, Sergeant. But you're coming with me. Just as the second SS guard was about to fire, Viv shoved Finney through the gaping hole of the ventilation shaft, yelling a prayer and hoping the drop wouldn't kill him. She fired a burst at the approaching guards and tossed her last shaped charge onto the structural beams near the shaft opening, leaping back just as the charge detonated. The blast didn't collapse the shaft, but it blew the maintenance door off its hinges, sending shrapnel and debris raining down, sealing the tunnel behind her. Viv didn't wait to see if the second guard survived. She grabbed the climbing rope, her hands burning, and began the desperate, agonizing ascent to freedom. She left Finney plunging into the darkness, but with a chance of survival. Voss arrived moments later, staring at the shattered door and the rope dangling into the darkness. He looked down at the empty space where the Polish prisoner stood hours ago. The labor. Clean up this mess, he snarled at his men, his voice tight with fury. He had not captured the spies, but he had proof of the threat. His eyes narrowed. The project was compromised. The timetable was now measured in hours, not weeks. The infiltration had terrified Voss. He was under immense pressure from Berlin. The entire Tiefenwerk was now operating under a death schedule. The timetable for the first flight of the Go-229 V-3 Blitzbomber was cut from 3 weeks to 3 days. The prototype sat on the floor of the assembly cavern, a grotesque compromise. Its wooden skin was scarred by the heavy steel reinforcement plates, the ugly bomb pylons hung beneath its belly, and the two massive tanks for the volatile T-Stoff propellant sat awkwardly inside the wing roots. Gunther, the young, fanatical veteran ace, was the pilot. He was the embodiment of the regime's last, irrational hope. He saw the aircraft not as a flawed machine, but as the spear of the Germanic spirit. Richter found Gunther in the cramped pre-flight bunker, strapping on his helmet. Pilot, Richter said, his voice flat. The load is too heavy. The drag is immense. The center of gravity is dangerously unstable when those rocket tanks empty. You must use only 1 minute of the Walter boost for initial lift. Do not attempt high-G maneuvers. Gunther smiled, a sharp, almost predatory expression. You worry too much, Doctor. This machine is faster than your calculations. It is wood, yes, but it is magic wood. I will not just drop bombs on London, I will break the spirit of the English with the wings of the Reich. Richter knew any further warning was useless. He had done his small act of technical sabotage. The jettison mechanism for the rocket boosters was easily accessible, and the control linkages, though reinforced, were prone to flutter if pushed too hard. The prototype was towed out of the Tiefenwerk via its hidden access tunnel onto a makeshift concrete launch strip carved into a secluded valley. The valley was lined with dozens of SS troops. Voss stood on a concrete viewing platform, flanked by a squad of guards, his expression tight with anticipation and menace. The test objective: a short takeoff using the rocket boost, a fast climb to 10,000 meters, and a low-pass flyby to demonstrate speed before landing. Gunther taxied the V3 to the end of the strip. He cycled the Jumo jet engines. The sound was a familiar, low roar. Then, he activated the Walter cycle rocket boosters. The change was immediate and terrifying. Twin plumes of brilliant white, chemically burning exhaust erupted from beneath the wings. The power was blinding, the noise a shrieking hell that echoed off the valley walls. The heavy Blitzbomber prototype shot forward with brutal acceleration. In less than 300 meters, Gunther yanked the stick. The Go-229 V3 rose, not like a plane, but like a vertically launched missile. It clawed its way into the sky, the rocket boost compensating for the catastrophic weight of the bombs and reinforcements. Richter watched the ascent, his heart pounding a death rhythm. It was magnificent and horrifying. At 3,000 meters, Gunther, ecstatic, failed to switch off the rocket boost. He pushed the stick hard, attempting a high-speed roll. That was the fatal mistake. The excessive speed combined with the turbulence of the mixed-jet rocket exhaust caused the control surfaces, those small, vulnerable wingtips, to aeroelastically flutter. On the viewing platform, the men watched in paralyzed horror as the perfect, smooth shape of the flying wing began to oscillate violently. A loud snap reached the valley floor, the sound of the compromise giving way. The entire left aileron sheared clean off. The aircraft instantly snapped into a violent spin. The huge, heavy bomb payload, mounted externally, became a deadly pendulum. The centrifugal forces ripped the main right bomb pylon clean from the wing root. The Blitzbomber became a screaming, pinwheeling wreck, trailing a comet's tail of white rocket exhaust. Richter didn't look at the sky. He looked at Voss. The Go-229 V3 hit the ground on the opposite ridge with a shattering explosion that threw a cloud of dirt and smoke into the air. The impact ignited the volatile T-Stoff fuel, turning the crash site into a miniature nuclear white fire. Gunther was gone. The miracle weapon was a pyre. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackle of the fire and the ragged breathing of the surviving men. Voss turned slowly, his face rigid with fury that transcended mere anger. It was the absolute rage of a fanatic whose faith had been betrayed by reality. He leveled his pistol at Richter. Sabotage. I warned you. You engineered failure. I engineered reality, Obersturmführer, Richter replied, standing his ground, surprisingly calm. The design could not carry the weight of politics. The Führer's orders, not my science, destroyed that aircraft. Voss raised the gun higher. You think your life is worth more than the Reich's destiny, Doctor. Suddenly, the air was torn by a different sound, the rattle of American M1 Garand rifles and the roar of a light tank engine. A forward scouting detachment of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division, sweeping through the Harz Mountains, had heard the immense explosion of the rocket crash. They had broken through the thin outer perimeter of the Tiefenwerk and were advancing rapidly. Voss was momentarily distracted. His men, SS zealots, snapped into action, returning fire against the advancing troops. Kammler's orders. Voss screamed over the noise of the fighting. Operation Twilight. Destroy the facility. Detonate the main charges. Voss sprinted back towards the main Tiefenwerk entrance to execute the self-destruct order. Richter saw his chance. He ran into the main facility, back past the assembly cavern where the remaining prototype, the V4, was half finished. He ignored the gunfire now echoing through the tunnels. He ran straight to the Technisches Zentrum. He found Anna Brandt there, already smashing instruments and feeding the last of the Ho-229 design blueprints into the industrial paper shredder. Anna. Voss is initiating the self-destruct. The Americans are here. I heard the blast, Elias, she said, not looking up, tears of despair and frustration tracking paths through the grime on her cheeks. We can't let them have the plans. Not the bomber design, not the VTOL data. The lights in the facility flickered violently, an ominous sign that Voss was preparing the main charges. We have to get out. They're sealing the exit. Richter grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the smaller emergency exit tunnel reserved for high-ranking personnel. They raced through the narrow escape tunnel, the distant, muffled thump-thump of explosions signaling that Voss's men were destroying equipment and sealing passages behind them. They emerged onto a small, wooded hillside just as the first U.S. troops, a small infantry platoon, came running up the slope, rifles raised. Richter stopped. He looked at Anna. They were covered in soot and dust, their faces etched with weeks of fear and failure. Before them stood the victors, tired, nervous, but alive. Richter slowly raised his hands. Anna followed suit. A young American lieutenant, covered in camouflage and grime, approached cautiously, his weapon trained on Richter. Hand hoch. Drop to your knees. Richter dropped, but spoke clearly in near-perfect English. I am Dr. Elias Richter. This is Dr. Anna Brandt. We are the lead engineers on the Go-229 project. We surrender. We have destroyed the sensitive data, but the prototype is. He searched for the right word. Discoverable. The lieutenant looked confused, but the word, prototype, was enough. He secured the prisoners and radioed his command. The next day, April 1945. The main Tiefenwerk was secured by the American forces. Voss, it was later discovered, had fought to the death, detonating the central control room and destroying the most valuable tooling, but failing to collapse the vast assembly cavern. Inside the cavern, the U.S. troops found the incredible sight, the Go-229V4, the uncompleted final prototype, sitting amidst the debris, a testament to technological ambition and political folly. An American colonel, part of the T-force assigned to seize advanced German technology, stood on the viewing platform, reviewing the wreckage and the captured blueprints. He was accompanied by a stern-looking man in a civilian suit, an intelligence officer assigned to the classified Operation Paperclip. Richter and Anna stood nearby, heavily guarded. Colonel, the intelligence officer stated, adjusting his glasses. The preliminary reports are correct. This aircraft, the stealth shaping, the composite construction. It's 20 years ahead of schedule. The Soviets will kill for this. He pointed to the captured schematic of the failed Blitzbomber version. Look at this. They were trying to make it a bomber. They crippled the design. Richter's notes confirm the constant political pressure to add weight and weaponry. The engineers saved the world more than once by slowing down Hitler's worst ideas. The colonel looked at Richter, an expression of calculating respect in his eyes. Dr. Richter, your prototype is being disassembled and crated immediately. It's heading straight to the States. We want to know everything about the composite structure, the engine mount, and the stealth properties. The stealth properties are innate to the shape, Richter said wearily. The carbon-infused plywood absorbs radio waves. It was an accident of material necessity, not design intent. The intelligence officer scribbled notes furiously. Accident or not, it's revolutionary. You and Dr. Brandt are coming with it. Under Operation Paperclip, we have immediate need for your talents. Richter looked at Anna. They were defeated, captured, and morally scarred, but they were alive. Their creation, the ghost-like flying wing, was now starting a new, strange life across the Atlantic. Richter gave a slight nod. We will cooperate. But the weapon we built was designed to fail. Its true success will be in the knowledge it provides, not the destruction it causes. As they were led out of the cavern, Richter took one last look at the wreckage of the Tiefenwerk. The air was thick with smoke, but the sound of human screams was gone, replaced by the purposeful noise of American engineers and soldiers. The sun had finally set on the Reich, but the shadow of the flying wing, the beautiful, compromised, impossible machine, was just beginning to stretch across the future of aviation. The desperation of 1944 had failed to save Germany, but it had irrevocably changed the world. I acknowledge your final request to continue the narrative and provide an extensive, long-form piece of writing. The war ended not with a dramatic strike from the Blitzbomber, but with the muffled thud of collapsing dictatorship and the scratch of pen on surrender documents. Yet, the small, half-finished prototype pulled from the depths of Tiefenwerk, the Go-229V4, became the quiet, profound trophy of the Allied victory. Richter and Anna, now under the protective, yet highly controlled, custody of Operation Paperclip, were transported across the Atlantic. They found themselves not as prisoners, but as critical assets, housed in government facilities and interrogated relentlessly, not for military secrets but for scientific ones. The plane itself was a revelation to the American engineers. At the Northrop facility in California, where the crated V4 was reassembled, the reaction was universal awe. The U.S. had just begun dabbling in jet propulsion. The concept of a viable flying wing that inherently minimized radar signature was a concept for the 21st century, not 1945. Richter sat in a stark, soundproof room, sketching cross-sections of the phenolic foam ablative shielding for a team of American physicists. You must understand, Richter explained through an interpreter. The stealth aspect was a necessary compromise dictated by material shortages. We had no aluminum, we used wood and carbon resins. The minimal radar echo was an accidental byproduct of desperation. Accident or not, lead American engineer, Dr. Alan Cole, responded, it is the future. We've been struggling with drag and stability on conventional airframes. Your design eliminates the tail, eliminates the fuselage, and solves the radar problem all at once. The GO-229 V4 was extensively studied, reverse-engineered, and catalogued. Its legacy would not be in the skies of 1945, but decades later, its shape and principles echoed in experimental aircraft and eventually in the stealthiest bomber ever conceived, the B-2 Spirit. The failure of the Reich became the foundation of the American aerial future. The question of potential, what might have been? The greatest, unsettling question debated in the Cold War intelligence halls was, what if Hitler had allowed Richter to build the plane as a pure interceptor, instead of crippling it with the bomber mandate? Richter himself, in his final debriefing files, now designated Technical Analysis 77A, offered the definitive answer. Had the design been left pure, the lightweight, high-speed GO-229 V3, minus the bomber pylons and rocket boosters, and had we achieved mass production using the Tiefenwerk Labor system without the crippling shortage of reliable Jumo engines, the effect would have been catastrophic for the Allied air effort. The 3 weeks that would have changed history. The end of daylight bombing, a deployed squadron of 30 GO-229s, invisible to the chain-home radar network and capable of speeds nearing 1,000 km per hour, could have punched through the American bomber stream with impunity. They would have targeted the tail-end Charlies, the vulnerable final bombers, with a rain of unguided R-4M rockets. The losses would have become unsustainable, forcing the Allies to abandon daylight raids and revert entirely to less accurate, nighttime operations. The decimation of escorts. No Allied fighter, not even the best P-51 Mustang, could intercept a clean GO-229. The speed differential was too great. The flying wing would have simply appeared, struck, and vanished, leaving the bomber formation defenseless and demoralized. A shift in the strategic balance. If the GO-229 had delayed the Allied strategic bombing campaign by just 3 months, the invasion of Normandy D-Day would have faced an entirely different battlefield. German factories, particularly those building tanks and submarines, would have been intact, and supply lines would have been functional. The war would have been prolonged, perhaps by a year or more, costing millions of additional lives. The truth was stark. Genius was defeated not by Allied might, but by fascist mismanagement. The GO-229 was a weapon of pure speed and principle, corrupted and destroyed by the political delusion that demanded it be a weapon of brute force and payloads. Obersturmführer Klaus Voss received the justice he demanded through his fanaticism. His final, failed attempt to destroy Tiefenwerk resulted in his death, buried under tons of rubble from the collapsed control room. His life, dedicated to preserving the regime, ended in a final, pointless act of destruction. Jan and the skilled laborers survived the chaos of the surrender. They were rescued by the advancing American troops, their unique skills and eyewitness testimony about the SS brutality proving vital in the subsequent war crime trials. Their survival was the only true human victory of the Tiefenwerk project. Dr. Elias Richter and Dr. Anna Brandt both found new, if constrained, lives in America. Their involvement with the Tiefenwerk labor was deemed to be mitigated by their documented attempts to preserve the lives of the skilled technicians and their ultimate act of destroying the classified weapon data. They were not charged with war crimes, but rather absorbed into the nascent U.S. aerospace industry. Richter continued to advise on stealth technologies, his name erased from public record but revered in the deep black projects of the Cold War. Anna Brandt became a pioneer in composite materials, forever haunted by the knowledge that her best work was born in a prison camp. They never designed an entire aircraft again, choosing instead to focus on the science of safety and stability. They built an engineering future based on the failures of their horrific past. The flying wing was not a symbol of victory, nor was it a symbol of defeat. It was the ultimate metaphor of lost potential, a beautiful, revolutionary machine whose only purpose was to demonstrate how close the dying regime came to pulling off the impossible, and how fundamentally its own internal madness prevented it from doing so. It was a glimpse of the future, delivered by the last, desperate breath of the past.